Nick Gibson, and I'm joined by James McQuiggan from Know Before to talk about connectivity and issues surrounding data security. James, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Nick. Excited to be here.
So much has been promised by the tech industry in the past, but exactly how connected is business and industry today? How connected are we?
Well, we're very, very much so connected. Between everything with email, you've got all these IoT devices. You've got, when you look at manufacturing, we look at our power plants, we look at healthcare. There's all these devices that are connected to networks, and then from there being connected to the internet. We always see that, especially, and I'm not saying we're out of it, but with the pandemic that we went through for 2 years, you had a lot of organizations that had to get people working remotely, and there were a lot of things that happened, and people basically were making connections a lot easier to get into to do work, and thus, exposed a lot of organizations unnecessarily. Now that a lot of folks are going back to work, a lot of that same technology is still out there and still being used. The key example that I always like to talk about is the remote desktop connection, connecting to servers within your organization and having those open to the internet, because it was a lot easier. And when you go out and you look at information, or you look at data relating to how many of those connections are out there, there's over 4.5 million worldwide of those servers that are openly connected to the internet. And you run into an issue where you've got security and you've got convenience. And a lot of folks more go to the convenience aspect. We'll worry about security, or we'll worry about something when it happens. And then when it happens, it's a lot more costly, a lot more resource intensive than anticipated, thinking, okay, well, if we get hit, then we'll just shut it all down and, turn it off and turn it on again. And unfortunately, that doesn't become the case. So we do see a lot of interconnectivity going on with organizations, with their own equipment, with the humans themselves that are connected. And so it's a lot more than ever before.
So there's been a lot of talk about the metaverse and the industrial metaverse and digital twins and all the wonderful things that these sort of new technologies can bring to the table for business, commerce and industry. Yep. But that, when they're talking about using metaverse technologies for all manner of global collaboration, etc., quite often, when they're designing things and talking about business models, does that raise the bar in terms of, or lower the bar in terms of security, when you've got so many different things trying to connect to what is an essential and core business process?
Yeah, we look back to years ago when, we were first coming in with computers, and you've got folks that are getting websites online and getting products out there and those IoT devices, and they get them out there because they want to sell them and they want to get them into people's hands and start using them. But security has always taken a back seat to all of it. And we're seeing that even with the metaverse as well. They're doing some basic security, but overall the security and the privacy that's going on with regards to the metaverse. But there's also hasn't been a large acceptance of it yet. When we look at it, when you examine it from what it has and what it's providing for us, it's great, and there's a lot of opportunity, but it hasn't really been accepted by society as a whole. You look at, and I always love to use our smartphones nowadays, but years ago, when you had the big brick phones, in the antenna, the 1G and the 2G of cell phones back then, you didn't have a lot of acceptance. It was like, oh, those were for rich people or doctors or, heaven forbid, drug dealers. I remember getting teased when I first got my first smart cell phone, and people are saying, oh, are you in a new industry there, James? And it took a while for it to get accepted. And you get into the early 2000s, and you've got the BlackBerry and the Palm and the key and the little keyboard, and then Apple comes along and revolutionizes it. And and ever since then, now everybody pretty well has a smartphone because of that, essentially that surgence of smartphones. And with the metaverse, we're kind of there right now. We're in those early days. People don't know what to do with it. people that are doing stuff with it are real excited, but there hasn't been a strong grasp on it. I remember reading last week, looking at businesses trying to implement a metaverse, and it's just not, people aren't understanding of it, and people look at it, again, it's one of those expensive things. And to have it in every home, it's just not there yet. And so until there's a new resurgence or a new surgence of it, a new development, a new aspect to make it work, because right now, you have to put on the, with what we've seen, you get the big goggles and the hand things, the paddles or whatever it is they call them. And, you look at VR and you look at extended virtual reality, augmented reality, that's been around since the 90s. And I remember messing around with that. But again, it's this slow process to get accepted by society. And until that happens, until there are more practical applications where people can actually use it, there's going to be that struggle until there's that application where it's smaller, it's thinner, it's lighter to use, it's easier to use. Eventually it might get to the point where it's just a pair of glasses, and you're wearing your watch, and that's what's doing it. But until you get past those phases where you've got the higher demand for it, that improves supply and also gets it cheaper, that people can afford it, they're not spending $800,000, $900,000 for one of these kits, when in fact we're spending that now on those phones. But the phones have to start out at a smaller price point, and they've grown over time. So I think with regards to the metaverse, with regards to a lot of that new technology, it takes time for it to get accepted. And certainly within the businesses, I know even from that perspective, even think about the internet and the IoT devices, there's that, it's more of, an R&D project for a while until it can get properly accepted by an organization. And then also working to try and get more security into it. But again, it's probably going to be one of those things where we'll deal with security when we deal with a breach. And unfortunately, it's the wrong way to look at it.
So at the moment, then, your focus really, in terms of connectivity and data security, is around existing business processes. Where do you see the biggest sort of growth in that area? Is it as a result of more people becoming aware of the need for data security and the various connections they're having, or is it growth driven by the fact that there is more connectivity and more people are connecting for more reasons now?
I think if we look at the latter of it, we've got more people doing more connecting. We're trying to get, and the biggest issue that we see nowadays is the whole issue surrounding passwords. People, it's something that we have to use every day, but everybody hates to use it. And so like water, we find the path of least resistance. And so we come up with reusable passwords or weak passwords. We're not using, we'll say the strong passwords. But now we're looking at technology and trying to get it so where technology can help us without having to remember all the passwords. Last week, there's a particular organization called FIDO that is trying to, and Microsoft has teamed up with them, and Google and Apple, to have it where we have less passwords that were being used, and it's recognizing the technology and that it is us that's actually using it. When you log into, let's say, for your Gmail account and it's on a new computer, it's now set up where it has to be authenticated on your phone, that's saying, hey, are you logging into this device? And that's where some of that technology is coming in to help reduce having to remember all the different, if you lose your password or if somebody steals your password, you would get an alert that says, hey, are you logging into this particular device? And you go, nope. And then you go through the process to shut it down. But looking at different ways, either getting to where you have what they call non-phishable MFA, where you're not relying on a code sent by SMS text message, or you're not using an app. It's something hardware related, either something plugged into your computer or your actual, phone or other device that you're actually verifying with, to reduce the risk of having to re-enter your passwords all the time into different places. So, looking at the technology and trying to reduce the need of passwords is certainly one way that technology can start helping us and making, the lives that much easier, but still at the same time, knowing that it really is us that when we log in.
So back in the day, I've been around for a little while, as you can probably tell by the greyness of my beard. Right
there with you.
I do. I sort of lived through the transition between analog into the digital telecommunications world. And I remember speaking to all kinds of resellers and manufacturers and businesses alike, talking about voice over IP and everything's going to be an app. What's an app? Even a child knows that now, but they didn't then. It took a long time, but there was a need during that transition for what they used to call integration, where you had to join all kinds of different things together to make them work in this sort of emerging digital world. Do you find the same need for that sort of integration between various platforms and telecommunications and data systems and platforms, or is everything pretty much seamless now? Is there integration still necessary, and people having to create bespoke solutions for businesses and industries as far as connecting things together?
Yeah, that's a really good question and insight to that. When we look at telecommunications and how far we've come, we look back at the telephone, now we iPhone, smartphone and digital, and I think back to Peter Diamandis's 6 Ds of exponential growth, where we look at things being digitized. Then we get into the deception where, it's got that early slow progress, kind of like the cell phones. Then we have the new product, the disruption, which we had with the iPhone. And then we start looking at demonetization, which is the 4th one. And we're looking at costs are being reduced. We get to dematerialization where tech is disappearing. And that's where we are with I see us with that telecommunications right at the cusp of the democratization where everything is everywhere. And where we've got communications, you've got that telecommunications aspect, right? With the voice over IP, it's to the point where, one solution doesn't fit everybody. Then you've got variations that come off of it. I think a little bit of the way Salesforce started with regards to cloud as a service. They had their CRM as a service, and it's just grown, but they're still able to do bespoke aspects within that, but it's still that Salesforce entity. And you see so many other groups and organizations forming off of that and coming out with their own telecommunications aspect and communication, not only with audio and video, but also through texting. With such the emergence that we've seen with Slack, Discord, those communication channels to be able to interact. People still like the typing aspect of it, or whether they're doing, voice to text dictation, but having that as well as doing the video calls and the video communication, but still being able to communicate successfully, effectively, and securely as well. We want to make sure that those, we've seen less and less of those attacks nowadays through telecommunication systems, trying to hack the phone lines and things like that. Nowadays, because of that encryption, now they just go directly after the human and target them and just gain access to their identity and, go from there. But the telecommunications has changed. It's certainly integrated with everything that we're doing nowadays. Everything we do goes on across the internet. If you were to shut off the internet, for a week, you've got businesses that grind to a halt, can't do work. It's kind of like a hurricane blowing through a city. Everything shuts down because that is actually a major part of the critical infrastructure, along with power, along with electricity, and along with water. Internet is now pretty well up there as that one of those critical infrastructures. Because I know I've seen people on the street and chatted, and they're like, I can lose electricity at my house, but I can't lose the internet. I got my phone, I can charge it off the car, but I can't lose the internet. Electricity, shut down the house, I can have a generator, backups for that. There isn't a backup for the internet when you think about it.
So a lot of emerging industries, as we're seeing them now with digital transformation, are either being driven by or are somebody else, they'll tell you, is being hampered by regulation and compliance. How have you seen regulation and the compliance issues changing with the emerging of different technologies, different types of connectivity, different sort of standards and all this kind of thing? That can help people, but it can also hinder them as well. How have you seen the change in regulation and compliance?
Well, when we look at AI, artificial intelligence, that convergence that we see with AI and quantum and machine learning and IoT devices, all of that coming together. But there's a big issue, with AI. There's, I know in the US and in Europe as well, they're looking, the US has started a government group committee to look at AI and to look at trying to regulate it, because for them, a lot of what they see with regards to that is there needs to be transparency. Everybody always likes to joke that AI coming online, here comes the Terminator and the Skynet story. But whether they're looking at that and going, okay, we don't want that. We need to have regulation. We need to have transparency, reporting things that are going on with regards to that. Same thing that we see with quantum. There's all these different groups that are coming together, again, to coordinate and provide that insight to what's going on and not make it a black box and that nobody knows what's going on. But we continue to see that same thing with the decentralized currency communications as well, with regards to blockchain and of course cryptocurrency. It's very difficult because of there's so many connections and so many touch points with regards to blockchain. It's hard to deter. You can follow the path, but sometimes it gets very difficult to try and be able to, get your arms around it. And so, yeah, certainly starting to see more with AI and with quantum, certainly going forward, and hopefully get that transparency so that it's not as scary and that big black box is what a lot of people are afraid of.
It's going to be a something of a minefield, and unfortunately, to be the victims of this particular car crash, who will end up by their experience informing regulation and standards, etc. I mean, things like digital twins. I mean, there's no, in terms of not least in terms of the IP surrounding this. Then you get into the various data privacy and all this. Unfortunately, the regulators tend to regulate. After all, after the cattle barons have run off someone else's cattle. But I think perhaps the tech industry and the telecoms industry has learned by its mistakes and is a little bit further ahead of the game now than it would have been 10 or so years ago. There's a great deal of benefit that can be gained right across the board from all kinds of interconnectivity of telecoms and of IT and data and everything that flows from that. But obviously there are major data security issues involved that one either does or doesn't think about when you start the journey. From your perspective, do the benefits of interconnectivity outweigh the dangers and threats involved in data security?
Yeah. When we always talk about security, and like I said, it's for a lot of folks, it's an afterthought, but we have folks that are coming forward with regards to augmented reality, virtual reality, extended reality, coming forward, trying to bring this to light, because a lot of the times, with this interconnectivity, the technology being developed, it's like, let's get the technology developed. Yeah, we'll have a username and a password put in there, to kind of protect that kind of information. But again, history repeating itself back from the 60s, where at MIT, the guy created a username and a password just to make it so he could separate the different projects going on. And, we're still dealing with that today. But the digital twin aspect, from that perspective, and I've seen that technology starting to be used within the energy space, electricity space. I spent the pleasure of spending 18 years working for a little German company called Siemens, and got to see some of that starting to come to fruition. Saw some companies starting to utilize that as a protective measure, utilizing that digital twin, so that if there is an attack, cyber criminals are inside an organization, it's difficult to tell what's real and what's not. So the digital twin is a good step forward to be able to, because that's what they're seeing. The cyber criminals, somebody trying to breach, are seeing those bits and bytes, and sometimes it can be difficult to differentiate and give the organization a bit more of a fighting chance to be able to protect itself if they're going after the digital twins versus the other actual system. So security it needs to be a lot more forefront, especially with privacy, and then what we're seeing with privacy issues with the data that's being collected, especially in the VR, because that's not happening. And I know there's a group already I had the pleasure to meet them back at DEF CON in Las Vegas back in August. They had a small workshop in the afternoon presenting about the dangers and things that are going on and how much more that needs to be brought forward to give this that awareness, because, you know, awareness is key. And I've been talking about it for 10 years when I ran the security awareness program at Siemens, trying to get people to be more aware of phishing attacks and data breaches and reusing passwords and getting that awareness. But it has to go further than just awareness. There's got to be the action that goes behind it, driving it so that in our own society, we are having that more of a security top of mind, having that stronger security culture. In the manufacturing, electricity, healthcare, you know, health and safety is always key. It's part of that culture. We need to have cybersecurity as part of everybody's culture to be able to protect not only our data, our identity, plus the interconnectivity that we're having with all the telecommunications and the data that's going on out there.
Clearly, security, data security is a core and fundamental pillar and foundation of business and society today. And clearly, organizations like yourself, which are doing fine work in the space, well, you'll have jobs for quite some time to come. James, I'm afraid our time is up. We could talk about this in more detail until the cows come home.
Sure.
But I do appreciate your time talking to me today. You've highlighted a number of key issues and some practical nuts and bolts that, as you say, people quite often just ignore until it's too late. So I hope that people will take on board what you're saying from your direct experience and can profit by it. James, thank you so much for your time. I wish you and your organization every success in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Nick.